Hello and welcome to the Unfuck Your Biz podcast, a show for creatives to encourage and inspire through actionable legal, tax, money, and business topics. I'm Braden Drake, an author, lawyer, tax pro, and educator. If you are ready to get your legal and tax shit legit, you are in the right place. But before we fully dive in, here is a quick word from my sponsors. This episode is brought to you by my private podcast, Braden's Besties. Did you know that I created a second podcast? It is exclusive only to members of the Braden's Besties Facebook group. If you have not already joined, go to www.bradensbesties.com where you can get signed up. Once you join the Facebook group, you will get access to a private podcast where I answer your questions from our Facebook group every single Monday. The episodes are 5 to 10 minutes long, super bite-sized, so you can dive in, get answers to the biggest questions you may have, and that's it. Pretty straightforward. So go join the group, bradensbesties.com, and I will see you both here and over there on the Braden's Besties podcast. Well, hello there and welcome back to the podcast. As always, this is your host, Braden, and today I am joined by one of my friends, Carnez Williams, an insurance broker at Carnez Insurance KC. Now, Carnez is a friend of mine from college, an attorney. Well, did you take the bar exam?
I postponed the bar. I'll never say never, but I just put it off until, till the umpteenth hour, whenever I decide to take it sometime in the future.
Gotcha. All right. So I'll call you a law school graduate who's pivoted into insurance. I always tell people, like when I go out to dinner with my husband's friend and stuff, he's a prosecutor. So they're like, oh, you're an attorney too. And I usually say, well, like technically, like I took the bar exam. I do still do some like one-on-one legal work, but a lot of what I do is, education based. And I actually like lean a lot into the tax stuff. So traditional law practice is awful. Can we just say it's awful? It's like not that fun.
It's pretty freaking terrible. Yeah. It's like stressful and there's a lot of paperwork and like, it can be very sedentary. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure it has its joys as well, but it just wasn't,
maybe, maybe, but it wasn't really in the cards for me. It wasn't really what you were interested as well in either. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? So you went to law school at Indiana, which is where we met. So I was either, I can't remember, a senior in undergrad or in grad school. You were in law school. I had a lot of friends who were also in law school. What did you do after that? So you graduated, moved. What was that process like?
Yeah, so I graduated. I kind of knew I didn't want to take the bar, right at that time. So, kind of moved to Kansas City, looked for some different opportunities. And what I came across was my first big job in being in an insurance company. So I actually started out with AIG, American International Group, which is the world's largest insurance carrier. Actually kind of did some quasi-legal work with them, working as a claims analyst, processing professional liability claims. So, let's say you were a nail tech, or you were, an accountant or something, that requires kind of like a business license. You would have purchased a policy with us, a professional liability policy with us. And if you received like a notice of suit or a demand letter, requesting, damages of some kind, you would have sent that over to me. And I would have worked with panel counsel of attorneys to settle and negotiate your case in mediation. So that was kind of where I started. And I kind of tried a few different things in insurance and compliance. And for the last few years, I've been a broker. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
And I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned nail tech, because when I interned at a plaintiff's firm I worked at in law school, one of the demand letters I actually helped write was demanding damages from a nail technician for like some kind of an infection the client supposedly got. So
absolutely.
This kind of stuff
all the time.
Yeah, I was like, this kind of stuff happens in real life. I always tell people, if you're in any kind of industry where you have like a physical proximity to your clients, whether you're like touching them, doing their hair, like massaging, all that kind of stuff has a certain degree of liability for sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So when did you decide to start your own business? So you have your own business, Carnez Insurance KC. When did that get started?
Well, so that's actually kind of just my my tagline, for like Instagram and everything, but my company that I work for is IMA Select. I don't know if you can see it here. IMA. There we go.
Beautiful.
That's the brokerage that I operate out of. But I mean, I kind of function like, you know, like an independent broker. Well, I am an independent broker, but I kind of, you know, have my own book of business within the company. So, you know, all the clients that I bring on, whether it's personal insurance, commercial insurance, business insurance, they're all under me as the broker within my book of business. So, and I've been doing that. I've been with this carrier or this company, excuse me, for just under a year. So had an opportunity to kind of bring in some, you know, bring in, you know, new clients and everything within a very short amount of time. But again, mostly it's just, you know, there's the brokerage level, which is, you know, the company that contracts with the carriers, but then I sort of have my own book of business within that. So
gotcha. Okay, so yeah. For all of those of you listening, we're gonna in a few minutes we're gonna get into some specific questions, like some specific insurance questions that I think will be highly relevant to you in your specific industries. But I want to kind of intro that with more specifics about how insurance actually works. Now, from the outside looking in, this might be, you know, like not the most exciting topic, but it's important information to understand.
Insurance is exciting.
I mean, I also have to preface my tax episodes with like, this might not be exciting to some of you, but I am very excited. Carnez, can you kind of explain to us what the difference is between an insurance broker and then let's say like I'm just driving down the street and I see like a State Farm office and I go in there, like you are an insurance broker. So what does that mean?
So I'm an independent agent. That means I work with any number of different insurance carriers, whether that be on the personal insurance side, you know, home, auto, that sort of thing, or on the commercial side, which is, you know, business owner policy, commercial package policies, you know, professional liability, et cetera. I take your information, you know, we have you fill out an intake form, you know, have a conversation with you, kind of determine what type of insurance works best for you. And then we shop your carrier, we shop your insurance options with any number of different carriers, depending on the line of business that you're in or your insurance needs. So, you know, I know on the personal side, I think we work with about 30 plus different companies. And so we're going to take your coverage out to market to find, to shop the best rates and coverages and that sort of thing. You know, we do that on both the personal, again, and the commercial side. Whereas if you are a captive agent, as we call them, and that's no shade at all. That's not a derogatory term or anything like that. I promise it's not. It's an industry term. So that just means that you have one option typically. You know, State Farm, they can't go to any other companies or anything like that because they are their own entity. They underwrite within their company. So same for Farmers, although they do have a brokerage arm apparently now. And then, you know, AmFam, American Family, you know, any of the others. By the way, I don't speak for any of these companies. So let me just preface it by saying I'm not a representative and I don't speak for them. But
yeah, so it's like as an insurance broker, you're more like an insurance matchmaker, more or less.
That's one way of putting it. We swipe right for you on your behalf. So
you should make that your new tagline. That'd be good.
Yeah,
that'd be a good one.
We swipe right on your behalf. That's right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what insurance actually does. So I think this is pretty obvious if we put this in the context of, you know, like car insurance, automobile insurance. We all know like why we have to have car insurance, but in the context of a small business. So I get this question all the time. I could answer this question. You're the guest, so I'll let you answer this question. Okay. If I have an LLC or if I have a contract, do I really need insurance?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, and I think that insurance is necessary whether we're talking contracts or, you know, sole proprietorship or, you know, LLC or whatever type of business you're dealing with. You want to protect three different things. And this is what insurance is designed to do all across the board. It's designed to protect your assets and property, protect you from liability, you know, because depending on the type of business that you're doing. And you also want to protect your income, especially if you are a business that, you know, where you could potentially, you know, have a loss of income due to a shutdown of any kind, you know, whether it be, you know, some kind of a peril or accident, let's say there's a fire or whatever the case may be, and you need to pick up your business and move somewhere else, or you need to pay, loans or rent or whatever, insurance is there to help you with all of that potentially. So depending on the type of insurance that is right for your business. So, insurance is there for those, three reasons, mainly, again, to protect your assets and property, to avail you of liability, and then to protect your income.
Nice. Yeah. What I often tell people about LLCs, and the same kind of concept applies to insurance, is the objection I hear people say all the time is like, well, I don't really have any assets and I don't really have that much income. So like, why do I need this? And what I explain to people is that legal lawsuits, judgments, like if you get a judgment against you in a lawsuit, that can stick with you for years and years, like perhaps
Absolutely.
decades if people extend it. And so what that means is that you basically have someone waiting in the wings to get the money when you're going to make it. So even if you're not making money now, you plan to in the future. It's almost like student loan debt, right? Like you can get forbearance, you can put it on pause, but it's always going to be back there. So that's why we got to protect ourselves from the outset.
Absolutely. I mean, you want to, and that goes to the liability portion of it, obviously as well as the income too. Liability, you want to, in the event that there is a claim or a demand or a suit, you want to have that protection in place, because insurance is there, not only to, pay out on a claim necessarily, but also to defend you. So one of the things that's very important to remember, and I think you and I discussed this previously, is whether or not the policy is like a duty to defend policy. And most insurance policies, are, but you all check that. It's a question you definitely want to ask your broker or your agent. Hey, is this policy duty to defend? If I'm in a lawsuit or there's a demand or anything, is the carrier required to step in and provide counsel, or defense of any kind? If so, how much? What are the limits of that? Does that fall within the limits of my liability? Are those limits outside of the liability, which we call defense outside the limits? Those are just some important things that you really want to make sure that you ask your broker when we're talking about, protection from lawsuits and claims and things like that, because it really does make the difference. I mean, as I was telling you in the very beginning, I processed those claims for a very large carrier back in the day. And, I witnessed firsthand, how important it is to have that extended coverage, because it could be the difference between, settling and winning the case and making it go away, or, having it go on and on for years in trial, for example. So, it is important to make sure that you understand what you're purchasing and the type of protection that you have in place via insurance when it comes to defense.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the different types of insurance. So, like, I know we have general liability insurance, we have professional liability insurance. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what the difference is?
Yeah. So general liability provides you with kind of three main things, and the main one being, property damage. So typically, if we're talking about, general liability, we're looking at a commercial policy for, for business. And so that will cover, the coverage for the, provide coverage for the commercial building, including any perils or losses such as fire, wind, hail, lightning, other physical or structural damages, and even like civil commotion or riots, damage that are caused by those things, as well as like vandalism, et cetera. In addition to that, any bodily injury coverage, if there's a slip and fall, classic slip and fall, torts cases, oftentimes will defer to a business owner's general liability policy looking for claim payout, et cetera. And then the other option or item, of coverage is like what we call personal injury. And I know that sounds like, in the legal world, we think personal injury, we hear personal injury and we think, oh, okay, well, that's someone who's been hurt, physically or whatnot. But actually that in the insurance world, that applies to like advertising, what we call advertising loss or which includes, for example, if you were putting an ad out there and it was somehow, either defamatory or salacious, or was, if someone found it to be like an issue with copyright, you used images or language or, a song that was perhaps not, not licensed properly, then you would have coverage in the personal injury under that.
Okay, so
under
that's
that coverage. So
that's actually interesting that you mentioned that,
yeah.
because I've always known that general liability policies cover personal injury. And I've always thought of that exclusively in the context of how us attorneys use the word. So I always figured that a copyright violation would actually be a professional liability thing. And that's not the case.
Well, I mean, it can. So here's the thing. So, some of the policies kind of like fit within each other. So, for example, like a general liability, those coverages are going to be, sort of already within a business owner policy, with the exception of the fact that the BOP will provide like business income coverage. So it just depends on the type of policy. Like some of the coverages sort of are uniform across the board. So so like personal injury is often found. I mean, you find that in homeowners, you find it in, in a business policy, you find it, kind of across the board. But that particular coverage does cover like, like libel, slander, advertising, a lot of times like copyright issues, things like that. So,
Gotcha.
but it's a universal coverage, like within various types of policies. So.
Okay, so let's use an example. A lot of my people,
universal, but
yeah,
but it's pretty standard coverage.
A lot of my people are in the different, like various different creative industries, right? Most of them are not going to have any kind of commercial spaces. So going back to property damage, let's use a photographer, for example, because they have a lot of equipment. If their photography equipment gets damaged, does a general liability insurance cover that, or do they need like some kind of property insurance?
I'm sorry, say that again. So if they damage their own equipment, or if they damage someone else's equipment.
If let's say if their own equipment became damaged, for whatever reason, it was left outside in the rain, like at an event, like they're at an event and they forgot to like pack it up and it starts raining, or maybe someone at a wedding, like, I don't know, steps on it, knocks it off a table, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, from a claim standpoint, it really just depends on sort of the circumstances. Like if there's an issue of like negligence kind of deal, like if they leave it out in the rain, there may be a challenge with that, just because there is a duty of care that you have to sort of observe with your property, et cetera. Like you can't just kind of leave things around and or break your own stuff, and then expect coverage for it, right?
Right.
But if there is an issue where someone else damages your property, for example, and your camera equipment, et cetera, there's a strong possibility that will be covered under property damage. But again, it just kind of all depends on the circumstances. But that would be that's still business property. So you would look for coverage under your BOP or your like your probably not your either your BOP or like your general or your commercial
I've
property
noticed
policy. So yeah.
I've noticed you insurance brokers, you're a lot like attorneys, and that you do not like to speak in definitives ever.
At all. At all. Well, because everything is so I shouldn't say case by case. So they're the standard ISO forms, right? But then it depends on the type of like endorsements that you have. It depends on, what, how the policy is underwritten. I mean, there's so many varying factors to that we'd be remiss to just sort of apply a broad sweeping brush.
And I think one of the big problems with insurance is that most business owners don't know what questions to ask. And a lot of insurance agents and insurance brokers don't really understand these people's business well enough to be able to anticipate the questions.
Yep.
So if I am a graphic designer, or I'm a web designer or a business coach or whatever, and I go talk to an insurance broker, like I want to ask them questions, or I want to tell them, hey, I want to be covered in case, someone breaks my camera. I want to be covered in this case. But as a non-legal professional, I'm not really thinking about all the ways in which I may need coverage. So how do I start to have this conversation with the insurance broker to make sure that I'm getting the coverage I need?
Absolutely. And that kind of brings me to, some of the tips that I have for, to observe when seeking out commercial insurance or business insurance, the first thing is to, and there are five. I've got 5 tips. Would you like for me to go through these now, or do you want me to hold off on them until later?
We'll start
Okay.
start with number 1.
Okay. All right. So tip number 1 I have is, so first of all, you need to really know your risks and your potential exposures. So, what are the common risks in your industry? What exposures do those create? So, going back to knowing your industry. So if you're a photographer and you know that you're going to have equipment, sort of in places, and depending on the type of photography that you do, if you're doing photography in sort of high impact spaces and populous spaces where there could be lots of damage, you want to be able to communicate that with your broker and say, hey, this is the type of photography that I do. There's potentially, there are lots of potential for this equipment to be broken, and as such, I have a high property damage exposure. And so, what type of policy would you recommend? So you want to make sure that you communicate with your broker, kind of like you communicated with me, that potential risk of having the camera broken in a high impact area. A thorough risk assessment will really help you determine the best policy for you. So that kind of all is lumped into the first tip.
Okay.
Any questions about that? Does that?
No, I think most people have a reasonable idea of, like their own property, right? We'll after you do the 5 tips, we'll circle back to professional liability, because I think that's where a lot of question marks linger for people. So we can dive into that. What's our tip number 2?
Tip number 2 is, don't just go for the cheapest policy. I know that's kind of, that's the natural inclination, but cheaper isn't always better. A lot of times, it's cheaper because you have a really high deductible and there are coverages that are missing, or, it may be with a non-admitted, what we call a non-admitted carrier, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I won't go too much into that, but
that's just like health insurance or any kind of car insurance. Like, you buy really cheap health insurance, you're going to have really high out-of-pocket costs if you have to use it. You get really cheap car insurance, okay, all this is going to cover is like the other person. Like if my car gets damaged in this, I'm going to be fucked because I'm paying $30 a month for insurance.
Right. And there's great non-admitted carriers, don't get me wrong. Just like there are some admitted carriers that maybe aren't the best fit for someone, but really ask those questions and determine whether or not that policy is best for you, not just based on the premium, again, because there are different factors within that. So sorry to be kind of like fudging, but I want to make sure that your clients and listeners out there know that they have options, and that they shouldn't just go with the cheapest thing just because of the price tag. So the other thing is sort of review and adjust your coverages. This is once you are insured. Review and adjust your coverages as you grow. So, as you receive, sort of more, or kind of gain a wider, I shouldn't say audience, but either, client base, or as you have more employees, purchase or acquire more property, make sure that you review your coverage and understand how your coverage needs have changed potentially. So
so that's review and adjust your coverage. That's tip number 3, right?
Tip number 3. Yep. Sorry.
So
tip number 3.
What I'll often tell people is anytime you decide to create, like in the online space, we call it a new offer, right? So once you decide to offer something new to your clients, you introduce like a new package, a higher level of service, like you should go talk to your insurance agent about that.
Absolutely.
Anytime you hire new employees, new contractors, go talk to your insurance agent about that. And then also I like to give people like kind of revenue milestones. Frankly, they're like pretty arbitrary. But if you get your insurance when you're making $30,000, let's maybe check in like every $20,000 to $30,000 more we're adding to our business and revenue. So that could look like every 6 months to every year. Does that sound about right to you?
I agree with that. Yeah, I think you should really, an annual checkup is great, but it really should be based more on like revenue growth, changes to your assets and property, employee growth. There really should be a review, anytime you make a major change to your business, or at least give your broker a heads up, because they will be able to kind of let you know whether or not a change is necessary or needed to your coverages. So
yeah, and for context for everyone, I know, like, I think I talk to a lot of people and they're always hesitant to reach out to their insurance broker or their insurance agent because they're like, oh, well, they might raise my insurance policy and like they might raise my price. And they're like, well, yes, they might raise your price, but the reason why they have to raise your price is because now you're doing new things that you need to be covered for. So when you go to get, like, when people go to get their insurance, I know you probably have a fancy name for this, but I fill out my form where I disclose all the things I'm doing in my business. And then if you don't update that and tell them the new things that you're doing, those things are not covered. So that's the reason why we check in regularly, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we don't have a especially fancy name for it, just a new business questionnaire, or, if we're getting started, and then just kind of a follow-up, a policy review. But it is definitely important, because what I tell people is, do you want to pay a couple $100 or, whatever it is, $1,000, more like now to have, $1 million+ of, coverage that can completely handle any potential claims or liability down the road. It's a matter of kind of how you want to balance the risk. Some people are willing to take the risk. Some people are willing to say, I don't want to pay $200 more in premium, a year. I'll take the risk. I'm fine.
Yeah.
But it's up to us. It's my job as the broker to say, to inform you of the risk and say, hey, here's what could potentially happen if you don't have this coverage. Because I have to sign off on that. Because if we ever come to, a claim or a suit or anything, it's important to me to avail myself of liability and say, hey, I at least informed you. So.
Yeah, one of my favorite Peloton instructors, Dennis Morton, everyone would take his classes. He's great. He tells people all the time in his classes, when it comes to like resistance training, cadence, all that kind of stuff. He says, I make suggestions so you can make decisions. And that's what I tell my students all the time too. Like, I'm going to tell you what your legal risks are. I'm going to suggest what you should do, but you take that information and you decide for yourself what you want to do. So it's a great mantra. All right.
Absolutely.
What is our tip number 4?
Okay, tip number 4. Let's see, read and review your policy. When reading and reviewing your policies, make sure that you pay close attention to your exclusions as well as your definitions. I tell people, go to the exclusions and find out what's not covered. Because from there, you can really figure out where you need to fill in the holes with endorsements or additional coverages that may not be a part of the standard policy being issued for that line of business. So, if you are, let's say, gosh, I'm trying to think.
Well, can you give us an example of something that might be excluded under a policy?
Yeah. And that's kind of what that's what I'm thinking about now. So, like, for example, if you purchase a business owner policy and you're expecting coverage for loss of, business income due to a pandemic, well, that's almost always exclusively, not covered.
Yeah.
Like explicitly not covered.
Was that always an exclusion pre-COVID, or has it been added to insurance policies post-COVID?
I didn't review every policy sort of pre-COVID and to know, but I can almost say that was
they already had that
pretty
covered.
Much the case. Yeah, they already had that like excluded, And
okay,
there was separate coverage that you probably could purchase, but now that you were in a pandemic, the chances are good that that's not available anymore. So.
Yeah, so you mentioned to look at the exclusions and the definitions and then potentially get endorsements if you may need them. I don't even know what endorsements are. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So an endorsement is just an additional coverage that's added onto the policy, that wasn't there previously, or wasn't part of the standard like ISO form or, policy that the carrier issued for that line of coverage or business. So for like, if you have a BOP, for example, it's typically not going to include like EPLI, which is employment liability practices, or, key person insurance. That's probably a different, that's a whole separate policy. And then I actually have a really good example. Hold on.
You also keep saying BOP, which sounds way more fun than I think it probably is. That's business owner policy.
Business owner policy, yes.
All right. Okay, cool.
Not the kind of BOP you hear on the radio.
No, that's all right though. We'll take that acronym.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, just those are just a couple things that like EPLI.
Okay, so essentially, you're going to look at the policy, you're going to find the section for exclusions, and then I'm going to read through that, and I'm going to say, all right, this is excluded, fine.
Mm-hmm.
Point number 3 is excluded, and I'm thinking to myself, well, shit, I really do want to be covered for that. I'm going to ask them for an endorsement, which from my perspective is like they're trying to upsell me on all this shit. But, you kind of decide a la carte what you want to be covered for, basically.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think upsells is,
a part of every business. Yeah.
It makes me sound a little cheap. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, you're just the broker, right? They're the ones that decide what's in the policy.
Absolutely. I mean, it really just does depend on the type of business that you have, and making sure that the policy is specifically crafted to that business and protecting you from, again, any losses,
right,
of property or bodily injury or liability, anything like that. But also too, like if you have a vehicle that you're using that you specifically for business, you want to make sure that you add a commercial auto, either separate policy or endorsement there. Products liability sometimes comes with general like a general liability policy, as an endorsement. I mean, these are things that you want to just ask about. If you know that you're distributing products, you want to make sure that you have products liability coverage, that sort of thing. I mean, going through the endorsements, going through the exclusions and knowing what's not there and what's not covered, can help you, again, sort of fill in the gaps. But
okay, awesome. That's super helpful. All right. So what is tip number 5?
Tip number 5 is shop around. I typically say, don't just go with the first quote you get. Really ask what your options are, whether that be coverage wise or premium wise, or even there's some really great add-ons or sort of ancillary coverages that come along with various products. I mean, I think there are a few carriers that do like a 3-year rate lock, so your rate doesn't change every year or whatnot. If you really kind of want that set rate, that there are all sorts of things that are important to various people in terms of insurance, and you want to make sure that you are shopping around to see what your options are and that you really get what you want. So one of the first questions I actually start with whenever I'm interviewing someone for like our new business questionnaire to see if we're a fit for them to get insurance or shop with them for insurance is, what's important to you in your next insurance policy, and or your next insurance broker. Like, what's really important to you? Some people say, oh, it's premium. Some people say, well, I want to make sure that I have a risk management program through the insurance carrier that will provide me with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all these different things that come along with the risk management program. Or I just want to make sure that someone is going to cover XYZ in the event of a claim. There are all sorts of things, and so make sure that you really express what you're looking for in your insurance coverage, and then shop around to make sure that you're getting that. Obviously within your price range, but then that it's the policy sort of covering everything that you need. So yeah, so shop around. Don't necessarily just go with the first option. You have many out there, especially if you work with a broker.
Beautiful. Okay, so those 5 tips were great. I am now, as you know, Carnez, I'm now making reels and TikTok videos to promote every podcast.
I did see that.
Yeah, those 5 tips are going to make a really good reel for me. I don't even have to think of it. You already created the list, so that'll be awesome. You mentioned employment at some point. So I have a question. I don't know how familiar you are with the California AB5 law. Have you heard of it?
Oof. This is something I will look into. I'm not
testing you on it. I'll give you the brief rundown. But basically, all it is it's an employment classification law. So it shifts the burden of proof on who's deemed an employee or a independent contractor in the state of California. It's a very scary law, which basically is reclassifying Yeah, hundreds of thousands of contractors to employees. And
Okay.
my question for you is, as this becomes like an emerging legal concern for businesses all over the country, is that even something that any insurance policy covers? Like you have a contractor that sues you that says they should have been an employee. They go talk to an employment attorney. Does insurance help with that? I know I'm putting
You
you on the
know,
spot.
no, that's okay. I mean, that's a good question to look into. I honestly don't know the answer right off the spot, right on the spot. But typically with like EPLI coverages and professional liability coverages, defense goes beyond just like what is you know, it spans to sort of claims and demands and notices of like a potential loss as well.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, the insurance company would likely like work with you to um, find whether there wasn't any liability there on your end, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because especially if it's a duty to defend, I mean, they want to make sure that they're prepping you for what may be coming. So if there is a potential loss down the road, I mean, that's something that you'll want to make. I would always say, if you think it's going to be an issue at some point, kick it over to the carrier and see if they'll provide some either insight, guidance, defense, because a lot of especially professional liability policies and EPL or EPLI policies provide coverage for like subpoenas, and regulatory inquiries, things like that, and those may even be subject to no deductible. So
Okay.
yeah,
What
so
does
I
what does EPL mean?
employment practices liability.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is that the same thing as professional liability, or is that something different?
that's a different coverage.
Okay, so employment, that's basically when you are an employer of someone. Is
Yes,
that what-
if you have one employee, I mean, I highly recommend getting EPL. It's you just never know.
Yeah.
Someone could come back and file a claim for anything, so you definitely want to make sure you have that coverage.
And
But
of
then
course, that's separate from workers' comp insurance. Yeah.
it is separate from workers' comp. That's a whole separate policy. That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Which
And would one insurance company typically be able to get you all of those things like EPL, professional liability, general liability, and workers' comp?
um, you know, that's most of the carriers, I believe, provide an option for those, but with workers' comp, a lot of times it just depends, because some states are they offer like their own like what they call like accident fund, and so
Mhm.
you would go, some states require you kind of like go through the state. So it just
Gotcha.
depends on like what state you're in, as
Okay.
to whether or not that's provided like on a private level versus like a state or monopolized entity.
Yeah, and I know
So
here in California, like workers' comp is legally required anytime you have employees. I'm pretty sure that's nationwide, not positive, but pretty
mhm,
sure. So definitely look into that if you have
yeah,
employees. Let's talk
absolutely.
a little bit about professional liabilities because we've kind of touched on it, but
Mhm.
specifically, we already discussed general liability insurance policies. What exactly is a professional liability policy?
Yeah, professional liability, covers you in for any type of like negligence, misrepresentation, or inaccurate information in the scope of your business or the work that you do. Most oftentimes, it's associated with like if you have to have a license to practice, if you're an attorney, an accountant, if you're a nail technician that requires a license, if you are you know um, typically the kind of the
Yeah.
lines of business that require some sort of like licensing with like the state, or something
But
like
see,
that.
I often call professional liability like the oops, I fucked up insurance policy because it's really there
Yeah,
like for
repairs and
mistakes.
omissions.
But let's say you're like an example I always give, which is a really far out example that would probably never happen, but let's roll with it, is like you're a wedding planner and you forget to sign a contract or like book something with the wedding venue. And now the venue is like booked with another client, and now your client wants to sue you for the mistake that you made. Does a professional, like my understanding is that professional liability insurance policy would cover that type of thing, although a wedding planner is not typically a professional, like they don't have a professional license like those other industries.
Yeah, that I mean, that's true. I mean, even as a wedding planner, I mean, and I say typically, but even as like a wedding planner, if you're a cake maker, whatever the case may be, you still want to have some kind of E&O, um, and that's where like the negligence or misrepresentation or whatever. So in that case, like I guess that would be kind of considered like a negligence, like you fail to
Yeah.
book the venue on the day, or fail to sort of book everything, and now you kind of like fucked up, and so
Yeah.
there's a liability there. But
So
that'll be there.
you call that an E&O, so it's errors and omissions. Is errors and omissions and professional liability, are those the same thing, or are they in insurance land? Are they two different things?
They're fairly synonymous. Yeah, they're fairly
Okay.
synonymous. I mean, you can use them sort of interchangeably, E&O and professional liability. So
Okay, that's what I thought. That's good, because
yeah,
that's what I've been doing. So I'm glad I'm
yeah,
wrong with that one.
you can sort of use them interchangeably. I mean, I think the professional liability is kind of more for if you have like a professional license, and then E&O being, if you are a business owner or providing a service to, like a commercial service
Yeah.
of sorts.
So I think this is all starting to take shape for me as well, because my understanding has always been that if you just go get an insurance policy with like very little investigation and very little talk with the actual insurance person, they're going to give you a general liability insurance policy, and that professional liability or E&O is an add-on, or this is what I've been told in the past. So my question for you would be, if you don't specifically ask for professional liability, is that something that's going to be included in your exclusions on your general liability insurance? And then do you have to like ask to add that on then?
I mean, it's definitely an add-on. It's not going to come with your general liability policy, and more specifically, you want to have that coverage because it covers you in the scope of the work that you're doing, the service that you're providing. Whereas general liability, that's just going to cover, kind of your like property damage, or personal injury things, bodily injury, etc. But you really want something that's going to cover you for, excuse me, like whether or not you fucked up for whatever specific professional service you're providing. So
yeah,
and general liability is typically not going to cover that. You want to have professional liability insurance for the specific scope of work that you are doing. I mean, and if you have a GL, that could be an add-on for you. So professional liability could be an add-on for you.
okay. And the reason why I really like to kind of hammer home on this point is my opinion, and you can tell me whether you agree with this or not, is that a lot of the people that I work with, their professional liability aspect and the errors and omissions aspect is actually the more important part. Because a lot of these people, like we're doing almost all of our work nowadays, like via Zoom. Obviously, if you're in the wedding industry, you're going to be live at events. But for those of you that are like web designers, graphic designers, you may never even meet your client. Like the risk of personal injury is very low. Those of us who are on the online course space, like I am, we're all in the information business. So we're really just providing information. So lots of opportunity to give people bad advice, not a lot of opportunity to necessarily physically injure someone. So is it possible to get just the professional liability insurance policy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I always
Absolutely.
thought for some reason that like it was just like an add-on to general liability. I didn't think you could get it as like a standalone thing, but you can.
Yeah, you can get standalone professional liability insurance. I mean,
I know, sorry,
Yeah.
apologies for interrupting.
That's okay.
I know like as an attorney, I know that like malpractice insurance, that's professional liability insurance. So I guess I understood it from that context. If you're a doctor, obviously you're going to have medical malpractice insurance, right? But as these other professionals who don't have, I'll differentiate and say those are professional liability policies. If you're someone who just needs errors and omissions, you can get that on its own as well.
Well, so there are the industry, obviously the industry specific professional liability policies. If you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, etc. But then there are miscellaneous professional liability policies that will cover you for the specific line of business that you are in. So, if you are, I actually just I did one for a friend, and he is an author and a public speaker. And so, and I think I was telling you about him, he speaks out against conversion therapy programs, LGBTQ conversion therapy programs. Well, since he's an author of a book, and putting content out there online as well as published content and speaking on various topics. We wanted to, he was able to, get some coverage or needed some coverage for the content that he was producing. So we were able to get him kind of a miscellaneous professional liability policy through one of the carriers for, just his authoring and public speaking and coaching, like life coaching and everything. So, which was, essentially a miscellaneous professional liability policy. So that there is that available.
Okay. So good to know for sure. Mm-hmm. My last kind of topic area I want to go over with you is, and this is going to be a very, very hard one, I know, but it's cost estimates, right? And everything varies, I know, by industry, but do you have like any insight for us around like what people should be looking for? Like you mentioned earlier, don't go for the cheapest policy. So what's the cheapest policy usually run?
Well, and I shouldn't say don't just go for it. I think let me preface that or amend that statement by saying don't just go for the cheapest policy, because the lower end policy, depending on the coverages and the carrier, may actually be the best for you. It just really depends, but don't just go for the cheapest thing that you see to fit the budget, like make sure that it's a decent policy for you. So let me amend that statement. But then also too, it really just depends on your line of business or, the services that you're providing, your part of the country, the carrier that you go with. There are all sorts of factors that go into it. And so it really is hard to pin down an actual like price range. But I will say, you can expect to spend, or your students and your customers can expect to spend perhaps something just south of, $1,000, or perhaps, just slightly over. I would probably budget. I tell people to budget about $1,000 for that.
Okay. That sounds about right. So that's roughly $83 a month. From what I found, because I help people with their taxes. So I see their bookkeeping, and I see I've seen as low as $30 a month, but the average, the average tends to be between $50 and $70 a month.
Okay.
But I would imagine that a lot of those people probably are not paying for both general liability and E&O insurance.
Okay.
So, I would say like $80 to $120 a month, just like rough ballpark, have that in mind when you go talk to someone. Obviously, I have no idea how much physicians pay but I would guess like theirs is probably over $1,000 a month, probably a lot more than that.
Quite a bit more. Attorneys as well. Attorneys can pay some big bucks for insurance or professional liability insurance. It gets really pricey. I actually sold that for a good long while. That was my specific vertical at a different brokerage, and it can get really pricey depending on the practice area. If you're doing like work comp law, I remember that work comp or criminal defense, that's like kind of lower, end of the spectrum in terms of premium. But then if you're doing like personal injury, or if you're doing like bankruptcy, or, some of the like financial litigation or mergers and acquisitions, it can get really, get pretty high. So especially if it's a multi-person firm. So it just really depends. But yeah, and again, kind of like it all goes back to like what your practice area is, what state you're in, many different factors, whether or not you want a low deductible, high deductible, add-ons, any add-ons. But you can, I would tell people as well, if you don't have property, or if you're going to someone else's property, quite a bit, or going out to other places and maybe using other people's equipment, definitely look at some, property damage coverage. But if you're just, kind of online, remote, and you don't have any sort of property liability, that's something that you want to discuss with your broker and say, is this something that I really need? So
okay,
just at least ask the question. So,
all right. So last question for you. If people want to work with you to get their insurance dialed in, how should they reach out to you? Where should they contact you?
Yeah. So I can give you my, actually I'll give you my work number, and you guys are more than welcome to, or should I just give you my, what will be best? Do you,
email? Yeah, probably email would be best.
Email?
But we'll put your email and your phone number in our show notes. But if you want to give people your email here on the podcast, if they want to write it down real quick, that probably
let me give you guys my email. So it is Carnez, that's CARNEZ Carnez.Williams, last name Williams at imacorp.com. That's Carnez.Williams at ima.corp.com.
Okay, and then, sorry, final question. I always share with people, as you all know, my Facebook group is called Braden's Besties. Carnez, I believe you are a member. Make sure you go join so you can be besties with me. But if people want to be besties with you, Carnez, can they go follow you anywhere? I know that you have a business Instagram now. Do you want to send people there?
Yes, please go and follow my business Instagram. It is at Carnez Insurance KC.com. So my first name, and then Insures, INSURES KC.
Okay, awesome. And then I'll also encourage everyone, if you don't mind, I'll encourage everyone, if you want, you can tag Carnez in my Facebook group if you want to contact him there as well. Maybe we'll ping you to answer some insurance questions. That would be fun. But
yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was awesome and very informative. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and you having me on the show today. I had a great time. Thank you.
Later.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Hey there. Before you go, I wanted to give a quick thanks. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. If you loved it, I would love for you to take a screenshot of the episode or snap a quick selfie while you are listening. Share it on social and give me a tag. It'll help other kick-ass entrepreneurs like yourself find the show. That's it for today. I'll be back soon with a new episode. Meanwhile, let's roll up our sleeves and unfuck that biz.